The rain hit the rooftop like 1,000 fists. Inside the limousine, John Miller stared out the tinted window, lost in thought as flashes from paparazzi cameras lit up the night. Once hailed as the king of the screen, John was now reduced to a whisper in a world that once roared for his attention. His body, once his temple, betrayed him. His voice, so familiar to millions, trembled now, uncertain. The gala tonight was meant to honor him, but inside he felt like a fraud. As he stepped out, a sea of applause and flashing lights greeted him. John smiled, though every fiber of his being screamed in pain. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him like a brick. His knees buckled. The crowd gasped. Cameras clicked in a frenzy as his assistant rushed to his side. "Mr. Miller!" The world spun, voices blurred, and before he could respond, everything went dark. He woke up in a sterile hospital room, the beeping of machines replacing the echoes of applause. His mother, Helen Miller, stood at the window, arms crossed, face tight with controlled panic. "You've embarrassed us all," she hissed, not turning to face him. John's voice cracked. "What happened?" The doctor soon entered, solemn. "John, we've run tests. You're showing signs of a rare neuromuscular disorder. It's degenerative." For a moment, silence crushed the air in the room. John laughed softly as if it were a joke, but the look in the doctor's eyes held no mirth. "I'm 29, John whispered. "I just finished filming." The doctor gently interrupted. "It's progressive. You'll begin to lose control over muscle function. We can manage the symptoms for now." John's heart sank. It felt like the final scene of a movie he didn't agree to star in. Helen finally turned, her expression unreadable. "We need to prepare. Your image, your estate, your public narrative. This doesn't leave this room." John blinked, incredulous. "I could lose the ability to walk, to talk." Her voice was firm. "And you'll do it with dignity, not like some tabloid pity case." The cruelty in her control masked fear. Fear of losing the son she could mold. Fear of losing the icon she built. Days turned into weeks. John's home became a fortress. His beachside mansion sealed off from the world. Only Helen, his assistant, and Vanessa Moore, his glamorous fiancée, were allowed in. Vanessa played the role of devoted partner well, but John noticed her smiles, didn't reach her eyes anymore. She avoided touching him, as if frailty was contagious. The news hadn't broken yet. John's last public appearance had been spun as dehydration, but the rumors swirled. Projects were postponed. Directors stopped calling. Sponsors vanished. The silence was louder than any scandal, and John, once the face of fearless action, now struggled to climb a flight of stairs without help. One morning, he overheard Vanessa on the phone. "I'm not marrying a man who can't even lift a glass of water, Richard." Her voice sliced through the hallway. "Just wait. Once the will is updated, I'll get what's mine." John's hand gripped the doorframe. Richard, his manager, his best friend since college. He backed away slowly, heart hammering. Betrayal tasted like bile. He didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed a plan, and strength he no longer had. His condition worsened, fine motor skills deteriorating rapidly. Helen insisted on hiring a professional caregiver. "You're not dying," she barked. "You're adjusting." Her denial wrapped around him like chains. That's when Emily. Rose walked through the door. She was not what he expected. Young, grounded, with eyes that didn't flinch at his declining state. She greeted Helen with professional calm, but John saw the judgment in his mother's face. "You sent her." Helen spat at the agency on the phone. "She's a child." Emily, unshaken, simply said, "I've worked in terminal care for 5 years. I don't scare easily." The first meeting was cold. "I don't want a babysitter." John snapped. "You're not my savior." Emily placed his medication on the side table, voice gentle but firm. "I'm here to help, whether you want it or not." She opened the curtains, letting light flood the room. John winced. The light hurt, but so did the darkness he'd let in. That night alone in bed, John stared at the ceiling. His mind replayed Vanessa's words. Richard's silence, Helen's control, the doctor's prognosis, and now this stranger walking into his world like she belonged. Something had to break. Something had to change. And deep down, he knew it would start with Emily. The days blurred into one another. Emily arrived each morning with the same gentle determination. She greeted John with a soft, "Good morning," opened the curtains, checked his medication, and never commented on the silence he returned. He watched her, curious, despite himself. She moved like someone who had been through storms and survived, not untouched but unbroken. Helen Miller remained skeptical, hovering in the background like a hawk. "She's getting too comfortable," she said one evening, sipping her wine. Vanessa, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror, replied flatly, "She's harmless. If anything, she makes us look good. Public sympathy, remember?" Helen's eyes narrowed. "No one must know what he has. Not yet." John overheard. He always did. The house echoed their secrets, and his condition made him invisible to them, an advantage he didn't ask for but had started to use. That night, he called Emily into the room. "You've been quiet," he murmured. She met his eyes calmly. "You've been angry." For the first time, he didn't deny it. "Maybe, but you stayed." Emily shrugged, folding a blanket. "You're not the first person I've watched fall apart, and I've seen worse rebuild from less." Her words hung in the air like incense, comforting but strange. John said nothing. But that night he slept deeper than usual. Dreams came, fragmented, like scenes from a film he once starred in. Running, applause, falling, a scream, flashback, a girl's voice screaming, water, darkness. He woke up in a sweat. Emily rushed in, face tight with concern. "You called out," she said. John looked away, ashamed. "Just a dream." But she didn't leave. She sat beside the bed, silent. Her presence didn't demand explanation. And strangely, that silence spoke volumes. The next morning, Helen was waiting for Emily in the foyer. "You're overstepping." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I'm doing my job." "Your job," Helen snapped, "is not to bond. This is not a friendship. Keep it professional, or I'll find someone who will." Emily smiled politely. "If he asks me to leave, I'll go. Until then, I stay." Upstairs, John watched from the security monitor he secretly had installed months ago. It was meant to keep an eye on staff, but now he used it to observe his mother and Vanessa. He watched their carefully constructed masks crack when they thought no one was watching. And slowly, Emily began to stand apart from all of them. One afternoon, John asked Emily to wheel him outside to the garden. It was the first time he'd gone beyond the patio in weeks. The air was crisp. The sun hit his face. For a moment, he felt like a man again. Emily sat beside him on the stone bench. "What made you take this job?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maybe I needed to believe in something." He studied her. "That's not an answer." Emily looked down. "My father died in a place like this. Alone. He was sick and proud. Pushed everyone away. I swore no one else I care for would go through that." "You care for me?" John asked. She didn't flinch. "I care enough to not walk away, yet." That night, Vanessa tried to seduce John. Dressed in silk, perfume heavy in the air, she leaned in, her voice honeyed. "We can still be us, Johnny. You just have to fight." He looked at her, eyes glassy. "You kissed Richard." Her body went stiff. "What are you talking about?" "You're not as quiet as you think," Vanessa laughed coldly. "So now you're spying on me?" She stood, fire in her eyes. "You're sick, John. You're not thinking clearly." "No," he said softly. "I'm finally thinking clearly." She stormed out. Emily entered minutes later to check on him. "Do you believe in gut instincts?" he asked. She nodded. "Always." He whispered, "Mine's screaming." In the darkness of his room, the shadows on the wall seemed to shift. He felt the weight of the house, the secrets inside it, the eyes watching, and beneath it all, something was unraveling. He could feel it. A storm was coming. Emily saw it too, but neither of them knew how deep the roots of betrayal went. The next morning, Emily arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still painted with pale blue and soft gold as the sun rose over the ocean outside John's window. She moved quietly through the house, noting how eerily still everything felt. When she opened his bedroom door, she was surprised to find John already awake, staring at the horizon. "I couldn't sleep," he said before she could ask. Emily wheeled his chair closer to the balcony. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine. He closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. "I forgot what morning felt like." She smiled. "It's the most honest part of the day. No masks yet," John chuckled faintly. "Then I should live only in mornings." They sat in silence, the kind that felt mutual, not imposed. Emily brought his tea, laced with medicine, and he sipped it slowly, watching her. "You don't treat me like glass," he said. "Everyone else tiptoes around me like I might break with a wrong word." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Maybe because you asked to be left alone." He nodded. "Yeah, I did." Later that afternoon, while John napped, Emily walked past the study and overheard Richard's voice. He was speaking to someone over the phone. "Yes, the accounts are still under his name. No, he hasn't signed over anything yet, but give it time, he's getting weaker." She froze, then backed away silently. The smile Richard gave her minutes later chilled her to the bone. She didn't tell John, not yet. He was fragile, yes, but also proud. Accusing his oldest friend without proof could shatter him. Instead, Emily began noting patterns. Locked drawers, phone calls behind closed doors, Vanessa's disappearing jewelry that somehow reappeared. Pieces of a puzzle were forming, and Emily was determined to see the whole picture. That evening, as she helped John settle into bed, he spoke suddenly. "I used to have nightmares about being forgotten, not by fans, by people I love." Emily paused. "That's a heavy fear for someone so adored." John turned his head. "Adored is not the same as loved. I think you know that." She did, more than he could guess. He asked her to stay and talk. "Tell me about you," he said. Emily hesitated, then relented. "I'm the youngest of three. Grew up in a small town. My dad was a mechanic, worked with his hands until they failed him. ALS. John's eyes widened. "The same as—" She nodded. "I know more than you think." The next day, John asked to be taken to the music room, unused for months. Dust had settled on the grand piano. Emily helped him to the bench and placed his fingers gently on the keys. "I used to write music," he murmured. "Before the acting. Before this." He tapped one key, then another. The sound was rough, uneven, but it was music. Emily encouraged him. Each note was defiance, each breath between them, a rebellion against everything that tried to reduce him to a diagnosis. His hands shook, but he played until tears rolled down his cheeks. When he looked up, Emily's were matching his. "You're still here." She said quietly, "You're still John Miller." That night he dreamed of light, not the harsh glare of cameras or the artificial glow of stage lights, but soft, golden, honest light. He dreamed of a girl dancing in the morning sun, her laughter echoing through empty rooms. When he awoke, Emily was by his side, asleep in the chair. Her hand rested near his. He moved his fingers just enough to touch hers. Downstairs, Helen fumed. "He's becoming too dependent on her," she told Vanessa. "And you're not doing enough," Vanessa scoffed. "What do you want me to do? He barely speaks to me anymore." Helen's eyes were cold. We make him sign over the estate before it's too late." The plot thickened, but upstairs something else was blooming, quietly, carefully. In the space between sickness and healing, between broken trust and fragile hope, John found his first light. And it was shaped like a woman who didn't flinch at his weakness. The days moved forward like slow tides, dragging secrets to the shore. John was regaining some strength, small victories like lifting a glass without help or walking a few steps with a cane. To outsiders, it was barely news. To him, it was a revolution. Emily celebrated every inch of progress with a quiet pride that didn't ask for praise. Richard and Vanessa, however, grew visibly uneasy. Every improvement John made threatened their timeline. One evening, Emily passed by the library and caught a glimpse of them talking in hushed tones. "He's supposed to get worse, not better," Vanessa snapped. Richard lowered his voice. "If he recovers fully, the trust conditions are null. We lose everything." Emily pulled back, heart pounding. That night, she opened her notebook and began documenting everything. Conversations, dates, expressions, behaviors. She wasn't just a caregiver anymore. She was a silent witness, gathering evidence, but more than anything, she was becoming emotionally entangled in a way that terrified her. Meanwhile, John noticed changes in Emily. She was more alert, more cautious, sometimes lost in thought while helping him stretch his fingers or practice steps. "What are you thinking?" he asked one afternoon. She shook her head, brushing it off. "Just tired." But he didn't believe her. Her eyes were too alive for fatigue alone. Flashback, Emily as a teenager watching her father's body deteriorate. Her mother crying in the next room. No one came to help. The government assistance was late. The neighbors whispered. She had promised herself, never again. Back in the present, she stared at John, wondering if she was crossing a line. If she already had. One night, John asked her to stay late. He had questions. "What do you see when you look at me?" She answered without hesitation. "A man fighting like hell to keep his soul." He exhaled deeply. "I feel like a ghost of myself, but when you're here I remember who I used to be." Emily placed her hand on his. "You're still him, just quieter now." The next day, Helen cornered Emily in the garden. "I've been watching you," she said coolly. "You're too involved." Emily didn't flinch. "Because I care?" Helen's lips curled into a smirk. "Because you're naive. John is not your project. He's a broken man with too much money and too many regrets." Emily's voice was steady. "Maybe, but he's not alone." That same evening, John found a letter in his drawer. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard's. Inside were detailed notes about John's accounts, medical appointments, and private information he never shared with anyone. The tone was cold, clinical, as if he were a case to be managed, not a friend to be loved. He didn't confront Richard. Instead, he gave the letter to Emily. "Tell me what you see." She read it slowly, face unreadable. "He's preparing to control everything, when or if you sign anything over." John nodded. "And Vanessa." Emily's silence was the answer. They both knew. Now it was about timing. John began acting, not in front of a camera, but in real life. He pretended to be weaker than he was, slurred his speech again, needed help with steps he could manage. He gave them what they wanted to see. Emily played along. The house became a stage, and the real performance was just beginning. Late at night, John whispered to Emily, "We're going to catch them, but I need you more than ever." She held his gaze. "You have me." It wasn't a vow of love, not yet, but it was stronger. It was trust. And for a man who had been betrayed by almost everyone, it meant everything. As shadows lengthened through the halls of the mansion, Two things became clear. John's enemies were closer than he thought, and his greatest strength wasn't his fame or his wealth. It was the quiet, determined woman who refused to leave his side. John sat by the window, watching a storm build over the ocean. Lightning laced the clouds like cracks in the sky. The waves roared as if echoing something inside him. Emily entered, quietly with tea, but his gaze remained distant. "I remember when I used to love storms," he said. "Now they feel like warnings." Helen entered moments later, all sharp heels and colder words. "You've been avoiding your financial advisor," she snapped. "He says you're late on decisions regarding your estate." John didn't turn to face her. "Because I'm still alive and still capable." Her silence was tight. Her control was slipping, and she knew it. Emily excused herself, but not before exchanging a look with John. It was brief, but full of understanding. Helen noticed. After the conversation, she summoned Emily into the study. The door clicked shut behind them. "You think you're clever?" Helen asked. "Winning his trust, sneaking around this house?" Emily stood her ground. "I've done nothing but care for your son." Helen leaned forward, venom in her tone. "He doesn't need your pity or your affection. He needs discipline, focus. This isn't a love story, it's business." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Then maybe that's why he's dying inside." Flashback. A younger John in the same study, tears in his eyes as Helen ripped a script from his hands. "You're not an artist," she had said. "You're a brand. You do what sells." Even back then, the house was a prison gilded in expectations. The applause he once chased was not his, it was hers. John, in the present, wheeled himself down the hallway and entered the room quietly. He'd heard every word. Helen spun around. "John, I was just—" He raised a hand. No more manipulation, no more pretending." Helen faltered. "I did everything for you, for your image." "You did it for control," he said, "not love." She froze, then snapped. "You think she loves you? That nurse? When the money dries up, she'll vanish like the rest." John's voice was calm. "Then maybe I'll find out who really stays when there's nothing left." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. That night, Emily found John in the music room. He looked tired but freer. "I confronted her," he said. "It felt necessary." Emily nodded. "She won't stop easily." "I know," he whispered, "but neither will I." They began meeting in secret, late at night, away from Helen's eyes and Richard's eavesdropping. Emily helped John draft a will, his real one that protected him and left nothing to those who only saw him as a vessel of wealth. It was a dangerous game, but they played it with quiet fire. Vanessa, sensing something shifting, amped up her performance. Candlelit dinners, forced intimacy, crocodile tears. John endured it, all the while feeding her lies to trace her next move. Richard became more frequent in his visits, bringing documents that John never signed. "Later," he'd say, "when I feel stronger." In a quiet moment, Emily asked, "Are you scared?" John looked at her, terrified, but not of dying, of wasting whatever time I have left pretending for people who don't care. She touched his hand gently. "Then stop pretending. Be who you are, not who they need you to be." It was both permission and plea. The chapter closed with Helen standing alone in the dark, watching old videos of John receiving awards, giving interviews, smiling for the cameras. Her hand trembled over the remote. In those images, she saw the version of her son she thought she had created, but in her heart she knew he was slipping beyond her reach. The house was quiet that morning, unusually so. Emily entered John's room and found him dressed, jeans, a sweater, and sneakers. It was the first time in months he'd dressed himself. He looked up at her with a spark in his eye. "I want to go to the sea," he said. "Not just the balcony, I want to feel the water." Emily didn't hesitate. She packed a small bag, grabbed the wheelchair, and helped him down the private path that led to the beach. The staff watched silently, Helen nowhere in sight. The sun was low, golden, and the tide was gentle. They stopped near a dune where wild grass danced in the breeze. "Is this allowed?" she asked with a smile. "Not even slightly," John replied. The wind tangled her hair, and for a moment he forgot the pain, the weight, the weakness. Emily took off his shoes and rolled his pants up, helping him stand slowly. The cold water rushed over his feet. He gasped and laughed. "I haven't laughed like that in years," he whispered. Emily steadied him as he took a step, then another, each one slow, shaky, but real. They stayed like that for what felt like an hour, just breathing, waves brushing their legs, silence wrapped around them like a secret. The ocean had always been a place of power, and now, rebirth. Later, they sat on a blanket, the wheelchair, nearby. John's hand brushed hers. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "You could have quit after the first week." Emily didn't answer immediately. "Because you let me see who you really are, and I believe in that version of you. The one no one else seems to remember." Flashback. Emily as a child, standing by the edge of a lake, her father behind her, guiding her hand as she skipped stones. "Always look forward," he told her, "even when the water's rough." Back in the present, she reached into her bag and pulled out a stone. "My dad used to say this brings strength." John took it, rolled it between his fingers. "I'll keep it." His voice was thick. "For the first time, I don't feel like a burden." Emily looked into his eyes. "You never were. They just made you feel like one." As the sun began to fall, casting the beach in amber tones, John opened up more. "Do you think broken people can fall in love?" he asked. Emily's breath caught. "I think they're the only ones who understand how precious it is." They didn't kiss, but something deeper happened. An unspoken vow formed in the space between their words. That evening, Helen discovered they had gone to the beach. Her fury was volcanic. "How dare you risk his health for a stroll in the sand?" She barked at Emily. John interrupted. "She didn't take me. I asked her." "You could have fallen," Helen snapped. "I didn't," John said sharply. "I stood, I walked, I lived." Helen stormed out, slamming the door. Emily stood there, torn between fear and pride. John turned to her. "You give me reasons to live, Emily. No one else ever has. Not like this." Her voice trembled. "Then keep living, John. For your reasons, not theirs." Later that night, while reviewing the security footage, John noticed something odd. A staff member, someone new, entered his study while he was at the beach. The camera caught only part of their face. He paused the video. Something about it felt off. He didn't tell Emily yet, but a new question lingered. Who else was watching them? That night, Emily stayed until the stars blanketed the sky. She found John still awake, the stone in his hand. He looked at her, voice low. "The sea took something from me once, but today it gave something back." Emily sat beside him. "You," she whispered, "are coming back." The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a maze of mirrors, each reflection hiding something. John couldn't shake the image of the intruder in his study. The security footage wasn't conclusive, but the figures' movements were familiar, calculated, as if they knew the house too well. Emily noticed his restlessness. "Something's wrong," she said as she handed him his tea. John nodded, but didn't explain. Not yet. He had learned to trust her, but he needed certainty before dragging her into the shadows again. Instead, he watched the people around him more closely than ever. Vanessa had grown erratic. Her visits became more frequent and more desperate. One afternoon, she arrived unannounced with a diamond bracelet. "It was your grandmother's," she said, placing it in his palm. I thought you'd want it nearby. John smiled graciously. Thank you, I'll keep it close. Later, he locked it away. He knew it was bait. Richard, meanwhile, returned with more documents. These are just suggestions, he said, sliding a folder across the table. If anything happens, someone needs to be ready. John opened it, feigning interest. Inside were power of attorney forms. Richard's name was typed in bold. I'll review them, John said evenly. That night, Emily found him reading the documents in the study. They want control, she said. He looked up. They've always had it. I'm just finally seeing it. She moved closer. What will you do? His eyes were tired but clear. Make them think they've won, until it's too late to stop me. Flashback. John at 15, winning his first acting award. Helen whispering backstage, smile. Bigger, cry if you can. He remembered faking a tear. The applause was deafening, but no one asked if he was happy. No one cared that the light on his face burned. The following morning, Emily decided to confront Vanessa. They were alone in the hallway. He's not as weak as you think, she said. Vanessa laughed. Neither am I. Her eyes glittered, with venom. Let's not pretend this is about care. You want him just like I do. Only you're too noble to admit it. Emily didn't react. I want him to survive. You want him to disappear. That's the difference. Vanessa stepped forward close enough to threaten. You'll regret standing in my way. Emily smiled coldly. I already don't. Later, John found Emily in the garden, her hands trembling. She threatened you, he asked. Not directly. She lied. He took her hand. Don't lie to me, not you. The vulnerability in his voice cracked her resolve. Yes, but I'm not leaving. I can't. That night, John faked a fever. Helen panicked. Richard arrived within the hour. Vanessa hovered with ice packs. Emily watched silently as the three buzzed around him like bees around a carcass. He lay still, pretending weakness, listening, measuring, memorizing. Once they left, John whispered, They're afraid of losing me. Not because they love me, but because they've built their lives around my fall. Emily sat beside him. Then we build something stronger, something they can't touch. He reached out and touched her face gently. Are you with me? Her answer came without pause. Always. At midnight, John retrieved the security footage again. This time, Emily watched with him. They froze the frame. The face was clearer now. Just enough. It's one of the staff, she said slowly. But not regular staff. John's heart sank. Then someone's been planted here watching us from the inside. The truth, it seemed, wasn't just in the air, it was in the walls. And now, someone was watching them watch back. The game had shifted, and neither of them were safe anymore. The following morning, the air was heavy with tension. Every glance from the staff felt loaded, every sound in the hallway a potential threat. Emily and John exchanged few words, but their eyes spoke constantly. Plans were forming silently between them, stitched together by instinct and urgency. John insisted on practicing his walk again. Emily supported him, steady and patient. With each step, he felt less like a ghost and more like a man reclaiming himself. You're stronger than you think, she whispered as he rested. He smiled, sweat on his brow. Only because you remind me every day. After lunch, they escaped to the greenhouse, a forgotten glass structure behind the mansion, overtaken by vines and silence. John hadn't been there in years. My mother never liked this place, he said. Too wild, too alive. Emily opened the skylight and the light poured in. Then it's perfect. There, surrounded by unkempt beauty, something shifted between them. John reached for her hand, not out of need but choice. I'm afraid, he confessed. Not of death, of falling in love when time is borrowed. Emily squeezed his hand gently. Borrowed time still counts. Sometimes it counts more. That night, Vanessa barged into John's room uninvited. "I know what you're doing," she hissed. "The little games, the secrecy. She's not who you think." John's expression didn't change. "Neither are you." Vanessa leaned in, venomous. "If you don't cut her off, I will." "Then I'll make sure you go first," he said quietly. Emily found him pacing later, breath heavy. "She's unraveling," he told her, "but she's dangerous when cornered." Emily looked down. "So am I." He laughed, but there was admiration in it. "Good. I'll need you to be." Flashback. Emily sitting at her father's hospital bed, reading aloud a passage from a book about courage. He was already slipping away, but his fingers twitched each time she read the word hope. That word became her anchor. In this house, with this man, it now felt like a fire. The next day, they met in the music room again. This time, Emily brought a violin. "I used to play," she said shyly. "Badly." John raised an eyebrow. "Prove it." She laughed, then pulled the bow across the strings. It was shaky, off-key, but it was real. The room, so often quiet with grief, filled with imperfect beauty. He joined her at the piano, playing a single chord, then another. They improvised a song without words, each note a shared memory they hadn't lived, but seemed to know. When the music stopped, they were closer than before, emotionally, physically, irrevocably. "Emily," he whispered, his fingers still resting on the keys. She met his gaze. "Yes?" He hesitated. "If I ask you something personal, will you answer?" She nodded. "Always." His voice trembled. "Would you still stay if I had nothing? No name, no money, no house?" She didn't blink. "I'm here for the man, not the mansion." In the shadows outside the music room, Helen watched. Through the glass, her mouth a tight line. Upstairs, Richard received a text message, a blurry photo of John and Emily, hands nearly touching, faces too close to be professional. The sender, anonymous, the caption, "She's becoming a problem." That night, as Emily helped John into bed, he took her hand and pressed it to his chest. His voice was barely a whisper. "You brought me back from the edge." She leaned down, kissed his forehead and whispered, "Then stay with me, no matter how dark it gets." Neither of them said the word love, but it was in the room, louder than ever. The sky turned slate gray as a storm rolled over the estate, thunder rumbling like a warning. Inside, the tension was worse than the weather. Emily woke early with a sense of dread pressing on her chest. She knew something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. When she arrived at John's room, the door was ajar. He was gone. Panic gripped her for a moment before she heard voices from the study. She followed the sound and found John, seated, pale but composed, facing Helen, Richard, and Vanessa. Papers were spread across the desk like weapons. "You want answers?" he said. "Fine, let's talk." Richard crossed his arms. "You've become paranoid, John. We're trying to help you." John slid a document across the desk. "This is a list of all the transactions made from my private account without my signature." Helen paled. Vanessa's smile faltered. "That's impossible." John pointed to a page. "Forged. I had it verified yesterday." Emily stepped into the room, but no one noticed. The storm outside cracked like a whip. Helen tried to recover. "You don't know what you're saying. You're sick, John. Your mind is clearer than ever," he snapped. "I let all of you handle my life while I was falling apart. That ends now." Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. "You're choosing her over us, over your family." Emily froze. John stood slowly. "I'm choosing myself." "For the first time," Richard scoffed. "And what? You think she's not after your money too? Look at her. John's gaze didn't waver. "I have. Every day. And she's the only one who looks back with honesty." Helen's voice rose. "This is absurd. That girl has no place here." Emily finally spoke. "Then I'll leave, if that's what he wants." But John turned to her, his voice shaking. "Don't! Please!" The silence that followed was a wound, open, raw, undeniable. Flashback. John as a child, crying quietly. In his room after his first stage performance. Helen's voice from the hallway, "If you want love, earn it." That lie had become law in his life, but not anymore. That evening, Helen packed a bag. Richard paced, furious. Vanessa cried silently in the mirror. The storm howled outside, as if nature itself raged with them. Emily stayed with John, silent, present. She made tea, held his hand, sat beside him while lightning flashed across the sky. "Everything's falling apart," he whispered. Emily shook her head. "No, it's finally coming together." He turned to her, eyes raw. "What if I lose you too?" Her answer was soft but firm. "Then fight for me, like you fought for your life." He leaned in slowly, unsure, but she met him halfway. Their lips touched, gentle, trembling, real. The kiss wasn't perfect, it wasn't cinematic, but it was honest. And when it ended, their foreheads rested together, breath mingling in the space between words. "I'm scared," he admitted. Emily smiled. "Me too. That's how you know. It's real." Upstairs, a camera blinked red in the hallway, recording. In a distant room, a screen flickered to life. The same anonymous figure who sent the photo to Richard watched in silence. Their fingers hovered over a keyboard. A new message appeared on the screen. Phase 2. Begin. Back in John's room, Emily turned off the lights. The storm outside had passed, but something darker lingered in the air. The real battle was just beginning, but now they would face it together. Morning arrived, but the house felt darker than usual. A silence had settled, not the peaceful kind, but one thick with anticipation. Emily entered John's room and found him already awake, sitting upright, his expression distant. "I didn't sleep," he said, voice hollow. "Too much noise in my head." She sat beside him, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he said, "I'm going to hold a gathering. Here, invite everyone who abandoned me when I got sick. Every leech, every fake friend, every ghost." Emily looked confused. "Why?" John's eyes narrowed. "Because they need to see what I've become, not what they hoped I'd remain." She nodded slowly. "Revenge?" "No," he replied. "Revelation." That afternoon, invitations were sent. A grand dinner, one night only, most RSVP'd within hours. The press caught wind of it too. John Miller returns. They didn't know the real story. Yet. Flashback. John standing behind the curtain before his first Hollywood premiere. His father's voice years ago whispered in his mind, "Speak when it matters, otherwise they'll speak for you." It had taken him a lifetime to understand what that meant. In the days leading to the event, Emily and John rehearsed every moment. His speech, the seating arrangements, the staff security. "It has to be perfect," he said. Emily placed a hand on his chest. "It only has to be true." Meanwhile, Ellen remained quiet, locked in her room most of the time. Richard was nowhere to be seen. Vanessa's belongings disappeared overnight. Emily suspected they knew their days of influence were over, but something still didn't sit right. There was one more player in the game, and they hadn't shown their face yet. The night of the dinner arrived. The mansion glittered under golden lights. Guests flooded the marble halls, buzzing with curiosity. John entered the room with Emily at his side. Gasps filled the air. He was walking, slowly, deliberately, but without assistance. The idol had risen. He took the stage as Fawkes paused mid-air. "Some of you are here for a meal," he began. "Others for an apology. Let me offer neither. I am not the man I once was. but I am finally someone I can respect." The room held its breath. He looked around. "When I fell ill, most of you vanished. The people who claimed to love me scattered like ashes, but someone stayed." He turned to Emily. "She stayed not because of what I had, but despite what I lost." The crowd turned toward her. She didn't flinch. "And while you plotted around my death," he continued, staring directly at Helen's table, "she helped me fight for my life." Helen's expression didn't move, but her hands trembled slightly. Someone in the crowd clapped. Then another. Soon, the room was filled with reluctant applause. After the speech, Emily led John back to his room. He was exhausted but calm. "I needed that," he said. "You were brilliant," she replied. He took her hand. "There's one more thing I need." He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. "My new will. Everything is now protected. You're listed as my medical proxy." Emily stared at him. "Why me?" John smiled softly. "Because you already made choices no one else could, and you always chose me." In the hallway, a figure watched through the open door. The same faceless presence that had stalked the halls on the security feed. They turned and walked away, vanishing into the dark. Back in the room, Emily leaned in and kissed John. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear, just love, raw, earned, and unbreakable. The morning after the dinner was filled with aftershocks. Emails poured in. Some were apologies, others veiled threats. John ignored them all. For the first time, he wasn't chasing approval. He was walking towards something real, and every step was no longer just survival. It was a declaration. Emily found him standing by the garden path, sunlight cutting through the fog. He turned to her with a strange look. "Do you hear that?" She paused. "Well, what?" He smiled. "Nothing. No footsteps behind me, no whispers, just peace." She walked closer. "You earned that silence." In the days that followed, John's condition continued to improve. He took longer walks, practiced playing the piano with his right hand, and even began dictating a memoir. Emily was there for all of it, quiet, constant, present. But something else lingered beneath the surface. A question, a shadow, flashback. Helen arguing with a man over the phone. John remembered hearing it once, years ago, when he was still filming overseas. "He can never know," she'd said. "The will must remain intact." He had forgotten that moment. Until now. One afternoon, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope. Emily accepted it. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a screenshot of John and Emily in the music room, mid-conversation. On the back, a note in sharp block letters. "You don't know who you're sleeping next to." Emily froze. The photo wasn't just invasive, it was intimate. Someone had been watching them, not just inside the house, but inside them. That night, she didn't sleep. John noticed her quietness. "Tell me," he said gently. She handed him the envelope. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "It's not Richard," he said finally. "He's too loud. This is someone else." "Someone inside," Emily added. "Someone who knows both of us." John stood. "We end this. No more hiding. No more being watched." He upgraded the security system, hired private investigators, and interviewed every staff member personally. One by one, he looked them in the eye. One by one, they folded, until he reached her, a new maid, recently hired, young, quiet, no record, no name. When he called her in, she didn't speak. She only stared. "You've been watching us," John said. "Why?" Still silence. Emily stepped forward. "You're not a maid. Who are you?" The girl tilted her head, then smiled. "It's not over," she said, voice calm. "It's only just begun." Then she reached into her pocket and threw a USB drive on the floor. Give him that. Then leave. Before they could react, she walked out the door and vanished down the hall. Security couldn't find her. It was as if she was never there. John held the drive in his palm, cold and metallic. That night, he and Emily loaded it into his laptop. What they found were hours of footage, Emily helping him bathe, laughing beside him, crying over his declining health, kissing him. Every private moment captured. Emily covered her mouth, trembling. Why would someone do this? John looked at her, eyes dark. Because the truth scares people more than lies, and we have too much of it. In that moment, their connection solidified. Not as patient and nurse, not as lovers caught in a whirlwind, but as two people who had seen the worst of each other and stayed. The winds outside howled, bending trees to their roots, but inside, in that room filled with pain, truth, and unspoken promises, they stood unshaken. The next morning arrived cloaked in fog, as if the world itself had paused to take a breath. John sat in the study, the USB drive still on the desk. He hadn't slept. Emily arrived with coffee, setting it down beside him. He took her hand without looking up. We need to know who sent her. The private investigator returned hours later with a file. Her real name is Lila Morgan, he said. Freelancer, formerly connected to several high-profile surveillance cases, all under the table. Work. Most of her clients disappear after payment. He hesitated. This job came through someone inside the family. John's heart tightened. Who? The investigator slid a name across the desk. John stared at it, then slowly pushed it toward Emily. It read, Helen Miller. Emily gasped. She hired someone to spy on you? John's voice was cold. Not just me, us. His mother had known about them, every moment, every whisper. She hadn't just disapproved, she had prepared for war. That evening, John confronted her. Helen stood in the conservatory, pretending to admire the roses. Beautiful, aren't they? She said without turning. John held up the file. You hired someone to record my life. You violated every boundary. Helen finally turned, her face unreadable. You were drifting. I had to know who was influencing you. You mean loving me, he snapped. Something you've never done without conditions. Her mask didn't crack. She's dangerous. No, he said, stepping closer. You are. Flashback. A memory long buried. John, 5 years. Old, hiding under a table while Helen screamed at his father. You're weak. You care too much. He hadn't realized then what that meant. Now he did. Love was a threat to her control. Back in the present, Helen's voice trembled for the first time. I did it to protect you. John shook his head. You did it to protect your image, but I'm done playing the part. He turned and walked away, leaving her surrounded by roses that now looked like thorns. Emily waited for him by the fire. He sat beside her and handed her the file. We end this. No more lies. She nodded, quiet. There's something I haven't told you, she said. He looked at her. What? Emily took a breath. When I came here, I almost didn't take the job. I knew your name. I knew your history. But it wasn't until I saw a photo of you with your mother that I realized, her voice cracked, your father and mine worked together, briefly. My dad spoke of a boy trapped in gold. I didn't know it was you until I arrived. John stared at her, stunned. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want our connection to be about that. I wanted it to be about who we are now. He reached for her hand. It always was. That night, they went through the rest of the footage. Hidden in the folders was one last video, an old interview of John's father. The world will only love you if you wear the right mask, he said. But someone, someday, will love you when you take it off. John watched in silence, tears welling. Emily leaned into him. He was right. The fire crackled beside them, warm and alive. They were no longer looking over their shoulders. The truth had come, like thunder. But in its wake, there was peace. Outside, Helen sat alone in her room, watching the same footage. Her eyes glistened, not from regret, but from the slow, bitter realization that she had lost not just control, but her son. It was a quiet morning, too quiet. The house, once filled with tension and conflict, now held an almost sacred calm. John stood at the mirror, buttoning his shirt with trembling fingers. Emily entered just as he finished, holding the letter he had written the night before. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. He met her eyes. "I have to." The letter was a speech, one he intended to give at a private event that would be anything but small. John had decided to call everyone back, not just the parasites and opportunists, but the people he had once trusted, his fans, the press, the world. "They saw me fall," he said. "Now they need to see me rise." Preparations moved fast. The estate was transformed once more, this time not for a charade, but for a reckoning. Emily watched John rehearse his speech again and again. His voice, once unsteady, now rang clear with purpose. His words weren't rehearsed, they were lived. On the night of the event, a hush fell over the crowd as John stepped onto the stage built in the garden. He wasn't carried nor wheeled. He walked, slowly, carefully, each step a triumph. Gasps rose from the crowd. Cameras flashed, but John didn't flinch. This time, the lights belonged to him. He reached the microphone, took a breath, and began. "Months ago, I thought my life had ended. My body betrayed me. My mind was a prison. But the worst part was silence. Not the silence of illness, but the silence of abandonment." He paused. "Then someone walked into my life and spoke without saying much. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't run. She stayed." Emily, in the front row, blinked back tears. John continued, "This disease tried to take everything from me, but it gave me the one thing I never truly had, truth." He turned to face the guests. "If you came here expecting a will, or a eulogy, or a public collapse, sorry to disappoint. I'm not dying today. I'm choosing to live." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Helen, seated near the back, didn't clap. Her eyes were glassy, her mouth drawn tight. After the event, John disappeared briefly. Emily found him back in the music room. He was sitting at the piano, fingers gently touching the keys. "You did it," she said. He nodded. "No, we did." He turned to her. "There's something else." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, a ring, simple, elegant, honest. "I don't have forever, but I have now. Will you marry me, Emily Rose?" Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled freely. "Yes, God, yes." Flashback. Her father once telling her, "When a man fights to stay alive for you, that's love." She had never believed it, until now. Outside, Helen watched them from the hallway. Her face was unreadable. And then, for the first time, she turned and walked away. Not out of bitterness, but quiet surrender. John and Emily stayed in the music room long after the guests left. No more masks, no more cameras, just music, just love. The silence that once haunted them now wrapped around them like peace. They had gone beyond pain, beyond betrayal, beyond silence. And in that space they found everything. The next morning glowed with golden light. It wasn't just the sun, it was the weight that had lifted from the mansion, as though the walls themselves had exhaled after years of holding secrets. John stood on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the ocean. Emily came up behind him, arms wrapping around his waist. "Still real," she whispered. He turned and smiled, every second. Later that day they drove into town, John's first public outing since his diagnosis. People stared, but not in pity. They applauded. Some cried, others clapped him on the back. John had become more than a fallen star. He had become a symbol of something bigger: resilience, truth, and above all, love. At a quiet cafe by the water, John pulled out a notebook. "I've started writing again," he said. "Not a memoir, a script." Emily's eyes widened. "About us?" He nodded. "About what it means to be broken and rebuilt." She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then make sure you write the ending right." Flashback. John as a young actor on set, yelling at the director, "This character's too perfect. No one relates to perfect." Now he understood why. Perfect never survives. But real endures. Back at the estate, a package arrived for Emily. Inside, a key, a note in John's handwriting: "Meet me at the greenhouse tonight." Her heart pounded as she read it, unsure what to expect, but certain it would be unforgettable. That night she followed the garden path. The greenhouse glowed with soft lights, lanterns dangling from the glass ceiling. Flowers bloomed wildly, and in the center stood John, waiting. No cane, no wheelchair, just him, raw, strong, imperfect. "I didn't do this alone," he said as she approached. "Every step I took was with you beside me, and I can't imagine another one without you." He knelt, slowly, carefully, and held up a ring she hadn't seen before. Not as a miracle, not as a patient, just as a man, asking the woman who saved him, "Emily Rose, will you marry me?" Tears slid down her cheeks. She dropped to her knees and kissed him. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They stayed like that, lost in the quiet hum of life and love and everything they had fought to reclaim. From afar, Helen watched, alone. A tear escaped her eye, but she didn't wipe it. Maybe she was learning, at last, to let go. The next morning, news broke. John Miller engaged to former caregiver Emily Rose, but for once the headlines didn't matter. Not the spin, not the gossip, because for the first time in years, John didn't belong to the world. He belonged to someone real, someone who stayed, and the world it could only watch. The wedding was quiet, far from the cameras and flashbulbs that had once defined John's life. It took place in the greenhouse where he had proposed, a space now sacred to them. Only a few were invited, true friends, a small string quartet, and the ocean breeze as witness. John wore a dark suit, his step slow but steady. Emily, radiant in a simple white dress, walked toward him barefoot, the earth under her feet as real as the vows she carried in her heart. No rehearsals, no scripts, just truth, just love. Their vows were soft, spoken more with their eyes than with words. "You saw me when I couldn't see myself," John whispered. "You gave me back more than a life. You gave me a reason to keep living." Emily replied, her voice trembling, "And you showed me that loving someone broken doesn't break you. It heals you." They kissed under the arch of wild roses. Applause rose from the few gathered, and even Helen, seated at the back, dabbed her eyes discreetly. She didn't speak to them that day, but as they passed by her on their way out, she stood and nodded. Later that evening, John sat at the piano with Emily beside him. "Play something," she said. He looked at his hands. They still trembled, but they no longer feared. He began to play the melody they had once improvised together, a shaky, beautiful tribute to everything they had survived. Flash forward, a quiet room, a crib, Emily holding a baby boy wrapped in soft grey cloth, John leaning in, touching the child's tiny fingers. "His name?" a nurse asked. Emily smiled. "Hope. His name is Hope." John looked at her. "Middle name," he said. "After your father." She nodded, eyes full. Their story had begun in illness, in secrets, in shadows, but it had grown into something unbreakable, honest, imperfect, deeply human. Their love was not one of fantasy, but of war-torn hearts choosing one another every single day. John's book became a bestseller. Beyond the Silence, it was titled. He donated the proceeds to neurological research. His story, once tragic, became a beacon. People no longer recognized him for his roles, but for his courage, his comeback, and his heart. Years later, on an autumn afternoon, John stood at a podium in a modest theater, speaking to young actors. "Don't chase the spotlight," he said. "Find someone who holds the light when everything else fades. That's who you keep." And when the lights dimmed, and the guests left, and the house once again stood in silence, John and Emily sat on the porch, watching the sea. "We made it," she said. He nodded. "Not without scars," she smiled. "Scars prove we healed." And so they remained, two souls that had endured the worst and found the best in each other, not despite the shadows, but because of them. What did you think of this story? Give it a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important to us. If you made it this far, comment chocolate. Only those who watched until the end will understand your message. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. For more inspiring stories, leave a like and share it with someone you care about.